Well, no doubt you, like me, have noticed this trend for, shall we say, role swapping. Call it maybe blackwashing, although maybe that's an expression that's going to get me into trouble. Have you noticed that Netflix and Disney seem to, well, they've gone beyond being colourblind, haven't they? It's sort of all about the colour these days. I've certainly noticed that, and here on the Aussie Wire, we talk about pop culture maybe more than we should, but honestly, it is important. People do use music and movies and entertainment of all varieties to try and influence culture. Now, that's not an inherently bad thing, but it is something we ought to be aware of. And I wanted to bring on an expert, and who could be more of an expert in culture than a TikToker? Yes, that's right, we're going there. We're bringing on a TikToker to discuss the culture wars with us right now, and it is none other than Dennis Fang. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Aussie Wire, Dennis.
Hello, thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Now, I genuinely could not think of anyone better qualified to discuss pop culture than someone who has gone big on TikTok, as you have done, because that is obviously, you've got to have your finger on the pulse of what's going on in the culture and what people are resonating with and connecting with to be able to talk about this. But I've gone through your TikToks, and you do spend quite a lot of time covering issues around sort of the replacing of historically, let's say, white or Eastern European or various other ethnic groups with overwhelmingly, African or African American extraction people. This is an example here of something that you've covered in one of your TikToks, Denzel Washington to play Hannibal. Why does this bother you? Why is this something that you devote so much time to in your TikToks?
Well, it's simply because I value the truth so much. And these people who are trying to propagate this message that history, especially non-Black history was full of especially African Americans,
Mm.
is absolutely absurd. And there's been very little backlash against this in mainstream media. And surely I decided there must be some kind of thirst on the internet for some truth in this. And I decided to speak out against it.
Well, it's an incredibly time consuming thing that you do because, in contrast to most TikTokers, and most TikTokers I frankly would never invite on the show, but when I had a look at your work, you do put an enormous amount of research into what you do. You're not just there spouting an opinion, you've researched this. What, that's an enormous investment of time. Why have you gone and said, well, I want to change the world. I want to make the world a better place. I'm committed to truth. I'll get on TikTok and invest huge amounts of time into TikTok videos. It's a very specific medium, don't you think?
Yes, TikTok is quite a specific medium, but it's also the place where most people, especially young people these days, get all the information from. So
Mm,
it's exceedingly important that those who do want to reach people are on the platform where everyone is at.
mm,
And as for speaking about history, well, history is extremely important because it's how we understand the world. It's how we understand truth. It's how we understand who we are as people, where we came from. It's one of the most important topics that I believe is out there. And sadly, most people don't know enough about it.
mm.
And therefore, I've decided to use my platform to educate people on the truth rather than popular messages that make certain groups merely feel good.
Mm. Well, another recent TikTok of yours focused on this historical controversy, which clearly has a lot of there's a lot of noise and fury over. I've frankly never even heard of this guy. I'm not a big student of history. I'm more modern history than ancient. And you've dedicated a TikTok to addressing this question of whether this particular little known or relatively little known Roman emperor was actually trans. But the last part of this headline here, and does it really matter? I guess my question for you is, why are people trying to make others believe that this person was trans, or why are they trying to make us believe that Hannibal was black? What's actually at work here?
Well, ultimately, we do like to believe that history is about finding truth. It's about uncovering what really happened. But quite sadly, throughout all of history, it appears that history has mostly been used, especially popular history, been used to legitimize the current status quo. So, history legitimizes who we are as people, the current systems at work. So, even if we look at ancient Rome,
Mm,
they rewrote their own history to insert themselves into the Greek world, into the Trojan War. That's what the Aeneas was.
right.
But it's very obvious that Romans had nothing to do with the Trojan War, but they inserted themselves because they were now part of this wider narrative. If we look later, at nationalism during the 19th century. Like, for example, the creation of Germany,
Mm,
the German identity. Where did that come from? They picked out little bits of history from the uh, from Tacitus, a Roman historian, talking about some German tribes.
mm.
And that obviously has very, very little to do with genuine modern German people, but it creates a narrative. It shows that they've been there all this time. And what's the current narrative? What's the current zeitgeist? The current zeitgeist is pretty much LGBT people have been around since time immemorial.
Sure.
And therefore, they're going back in history and they're trying to find anything to show that there has been trans people all over the place. And sadly, it appears that there really hasn't been that much because they've chosen Elagabalus, one of the worst Roman emperors there's ever been. He was just a debauched teenager who was a bit of a megalomaniac. I mean, he tried to make his own religion, and he was deeply unpopular. And it really boggles the mind they chose to use him. It really shows they are scraping the bottom of the barrel.
So, Dennis, I have to ask because you've just answered that question off the top of your head with such a depth of historical knowledge. What is your background? Did you study history? What's brought you to the point where you know that much about these sorts of topics?
Unfortunately, I'm not a professor in history, but I did study media. So
Mm,
that's my background as a journalist.
mm.
And I just have a tremendous interest in history since I was very young.
Well,
And therefore, I've decided to combine the two. And I think being a journalist with a strong historical knowledge
mm,
has allowed me to carve my own little niche and has allowed me to see topical issues affecting the world today through a longer lens,
mm.
which is something that I find quite troubling with most people because they don't have the historical knowledge to put things in context.
Well, it's impressive, is what it is. Now, I just want to draw your attention to an upcoming remake here. We've got on the top of this picture here, we've got the Redhead Festival in Dublin, Ireland, which is obviously an annual gathering for redheads. And in the bottom half of that picture, we have the upcoming Disney remake of that event. Obviously, that's a joke meme, but this concept has made its way into popular culture in so many different forms. It's so obvious what Netflix and Disney are doing. Do you think there's light at the end of the tunnel? Do you think, I mean, Disney's getting smashed at the box office at the moment. They're losing money hand over fist. Do you think that economic realities are going to change this anytime soon, or are they really committed to just carrying this forward?
I think they do want to carry this forwards, but the reality is, if they do, they will lose a tremendous amount of money, as we are seeing right now. All
Mm,
the Disney remakes, particularly Little Mermaid,
mm,
they were absolute bombs, which does show that although there is a demographic of people who do want this, it appears that most people simply see past this,
mm,
which does show that perhaps there will be some kind of turn. But at the same time, from my experience, when most companies try to appeal to younger people, what they're usually recommended is, what young people are into are LGBT issues. They're
mm.
into diversity, which is the whole reason we saw the Bud Light controversy.
Sure.
What they were recommended by was advice from a young person who has their own ideas of what young people want, and
Mm,
it appears that it's not what everyone wants, and
mm.
perhaps this advice would change.
Well, hopefully, we're going to see a return to sanity sometime soon. In the meantime, Dennis Fang, please just keep up that great work calling it out. I don't follow a single TikToker in the entire world right now, but you might very well have convinced me to change that. You might become my first follow on TikTok. We'll see. But in the meantime, Dennis, thank you so much for coming on the Aussie Wire.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.